Richard Gage, welcome to Planet Waves.
Thank you, Eric. It's incredible to be here with you. This is timely information.
Wonderful. Richard, your work, maybe you, but your work is not, my audience doesn't really need an introduction to your work. I have covered AE 9/11 Truth every single year since I heard about you. I have, I'll read your introduction in a second. I have played the interviews with the psychologists no fewer than 10 times. I use it as a teaching tool, particularly for my partners on the COVID issue. And I think that the psychology of this is ultimately the bottom line. But today we're going to do the technical side. We're going to explain how, as James Corbett said, they knocked down 3 skyscrapers with 2 airplanes. It's like knocking down 10 bowling pins with 1 bowling ball. So Richard, you are a professional architect with a diverse portfolio of things you've designed. Maybe we'll design a house together someday. You're from the Bay Area, so you're one of those people from out in that freaky part of the world. And you're a member of the American Institute of Architects and founder of AE 9/11 Truth.
Correct. And former CEO.
Yeah, former CEO and all of that.
And I'm working now full-time with my wife, Gail, at Richard Gage 9/11. We've done 75 podcasts together. And that's all on our website, richardgage911.org.
So you're on your own. You're doing your own thing. And I was interested that you became involved in this 5 years in after hearing David Ray Griffin. Was he from Brigham Young University? Brigham Young?
No, that was Stephen Jones from who taught at that school. He's a scientist. David Ray Griffin's a theologian from California, and he's written now 14 books on the subject of 9/11.
14 books. Right. So you heard this.
He passed away, by the way, a few months ago. So
didn't know this. Well,
we miss him.
I'm glad he wrote 14 books. And I think the important thing to recognize with AE 9/11 Truth is there's 3,500 architects and engineers who have signed on to the petition. This is not a Twitter survey. I understand the qualifications needed. You need at least, I think, a bachelor's background in education to be able to sign, right?
In architecture or engineering.
I'm an English major, so I can't sign, but I'm qualified to interview you. So that's a lot of people to put their name behind this.
Yeah, it is. There's only a couple of dozen that have put their name behind the official story.
Interesting. And look, once you understand this issue, there's not much to it. It's pretty simple.
Let's go and look.
So thank you, first of all, for coming on the program. We're doing this outside of the normal 9/11 season. We're doing it kind of on the opposite. My story is I was going to take a week off to basically write my form of friendly erotica for my birthday in 2002. Moved everything out of my schedule. Friday afternoon comes, and then I get the email from asil.org. I know you're not into the Pentagon, which is another FUBAR situation. And I spent that entire week analyzing the one Defense Department photo of the Pentagon looking for the airplane or the fuel or the wreckage or anything. And at the end of a week, I'm like, well, I am forced to conclude that there is a serious problem with this story. And if that's not true, it was one of those situations where it's fair to generalize that if one part of this huge thing is absolutely not true, well, that throws the rest into doubt. Plus, I knew Steve Inskeep personally from covering the Capitol in Albany, who was one of the first people on the Pentagon, on the little hill by the Pentagon. And he called me back after 6 months in Afghanistan. They sent him right to Afghanistan. Calls me back. What's up? Did you see a plane crash? Was there a plane crash there? I said, well, frankly, it didn't look like one. They called me to the scene of an explosion. Anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about exactly. I don't know. Yeah, I know that currently AE 911 Truth absolutely does not want to go near the Pentagon. And I think building what is the important one. Are you familiar with the federal judge? Somebody mentioned building 7 in his courtroom.
Yes.
He says, building what? And it was a 9/11 Truth website for many years, buildingwhat.com. I did not know about buildingwhat.com till 2007, I think. I was very surprised. So let's start from the beginning, if you would be so kind, now that I've had this friendly introduction to you. And our plan is we're going to do tech today. I'm going to talk about the technical facets today. Before I give you the floor, the thing I've always praised AE 911 Truth for, to high heaven, is that last 20 minutes of the documentary. That someone had the common sense to approach the entire matter from a spiritual point of view. And that's what they do.
Yeah, psychological mostly, and they delve into spiritual a little bit.
I consider that spiritual, the general.
The documentary you're talking about is 9/11 explosive evidence.
Yes.
Experts speak out. I made that quite a while back, and guess what? The evidence has not changed one bit. It's as relevant today as it was then. I encourage everybody to watch it for free on our website, richardgage911.org.
I've bought several copies.
Yeah.
And keep them safe in a DVD collection in my storage unit.
And that DVD is also available in our store on our website.
In case there's one person who has a DVD player. Most people haven't even heard of it anymore. They're like, what's that? It's like, so tell us what happened. I mean, a building 48 stories? How tall was building 7?
Well, let's get into it. I'll actually show you.
Just fell down.
Well, it didn't just fall down, as it turns out. Let's look at it.
You mean skyscrapers don't just fall down?
Well, we've never lost one due to fire, which is the official narrative of this building's collapse. And we don't want some of your listeners, most of them may know because you've done a great job educating them, but I'm guessing there's some new people here today who have not heard of the third worst structural failure in modern history. So I don't want them to be the last to know, and I don't want your friends or their friends to be the last to know either. I mean, this was, I felt like I was the last to know in 2006 when I heard David Ray Griffin on the radio, and I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He was talking about explosions, witnesses of explosions, witnesses of molten metal. This third tower that came down, I was literally in shock because I'm a member of the American Institute of Architects, and 90,000 of us, and not one of us got even one bulletin about this, the third worst structural failure in modern history. After towers.
Right. Where was the review? Like, you would think if that building failed that badly from some office fires, that every building in the world would need to be inspected and reviewed.
Well, at least hundreds and hundreds of buildings that were similarly designed.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
So yeah, completely agree. It should have been the most studied failure, and yet it was just swept under the rug. Most architects and engineers know nothing about it, and that's why we go to the conferences and try to educate them. And once they do, they say, "Oh my God, that's a controlled demolition." Well, we'll get into that, but this would be the tallest building in most of our states, Building 7, and it was dwarfed next to the tallest buildings in the world, the Twin Towers, when they were completed in 1973. It was about 100 yards from the North Tower. It wasn't hit by an airplane like the Twin Towers were. So, as you mentioned, it comes down anyway. We'll get to that in a second. But it survived the collapse of the Twin Towers for 7 hours. And it had a few small scattered fires in it. And let's look at the collapse of this building and see what happens at 5:20 in the afternoon. The east penthouse on the left comes down in an isolated event, and then the entire building does this. Straight down, uniformly.
The east penthouse collapses first.
Yep, that's 6 seconds earlier. That's important. And what does the official narrative say about all of this?
What we found was that uncontrolled building fires caused an extraordinary event. The collapse of World Trade Center 7 was primarily due to fire.
Okay, did you hear him say that? He actually said it, primarily due to fires.
That's what he said, right? Fires, right?
Yeah. So I want to make sure you actually heard him say that loudly. Did you? Because I may not have shared my sound.
Well, can we check fire in the dictionary?
All right. Let me just make sure. I'm going to reshare, and yeah, sound is checked. Okay. So I just want to make sure that you're hearing all of this.
Yeah.
So these are the worst fires that we have photographic or video evidence of in the building. And as you can see, they're few, they're small, they're scattered. Now, these are real fires in other buildings that were large, much larger, longer lasting, and hotter fires. We haven't lost one skyscraper due to fires, a steel frame fire protected skyscraper like these. Even when they're fully engulfed. After 9/11, we've had some incredible skyscraper fires. So yeah, not one of them has.
And it leaves a kind of a husk of the building standing there.
Well, yeah, it leaves an awful lot of the building. What they do, all these buildings are remodeled. They don't even take them down. They replace the beams that have warped, some of them, but they're fireproofed with cement-like fireproofing. And that keeps the beams from getting hot enough to fail. That's why we've never lost one of these skyscrapers. Well, let's see what it looks like. On the left, building 7, there's about 11 videos of this building collapse. On the right, known controlled demolitions. Is there any similarity? Is there enough similarity?
They're square. The buildings are rectangular.
Enough similarity to warrant an investigation into the possible use of explosives, especially since it looks exactly like a controlled demolition, especially since fire, the official cause of this building's collapse, has never in history brought down a steel frame fire protected building.
Yep.
So we have to ask ourselves, does it have any of the typical features of controlled demolition? And certainly, beginning with feature number 1, a sudden onset, the building is standing still, and all of a sudden, it drops straight down uniformly.
What you're seeing are high shots.
Well, let's listen to Dan Rather.
Now, here we're going to show you a videotape of the collapse itself. Describe that. Now we go to videotape, the collapse of this building.
It's amazing.
Amazing, incredible, pick your word. For the 3rd time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite.
No.
What? Dan, what did you say? We've never heard these words from Dan after 9/11. In fact,
right.
The building on mainstream media coming down. They just swept this under the rug. Feature number 2, is there a straight down symmetrical collapse? Let's look from West Street. Straight down symmetrical. Now, how does that happen?
It wouldn't have even spilled your drink.
Yeah. All of the core columns, including column 79, which is the particular focus of interest for NIST. NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology, who was tasked by Congress to explain these collapses to the American people. All those core columns had to have been removed simultaneously within a fraction of a second of each other, followed by about a second later, the perimeter columns. Any deviation in that pattern, and the building would begin to tip over. Do these fires have that level of precision? Pretty intuitive, isn't it? So no, they don't. And so how fast is the building coming down? Physics teacher David Chandler clocked it, and others did. It comes down at free fall acceleration for at least a third of its 7-second fall.
Yeah.
Damn near that for the rest of the fall. So how does that happen? NIST even acknowledges this, by the way. They acknowledge it 7 years later, after the collapse of this building. They fumbled this football that long, and they acknowledge that it indeed came down at free fall after denying it for that number of years. They were denying free fall, trying to justify how we could.
So stage 2 is the free fall stage.
Yeah. Stage 2 is the
meaning that it's falling like when you drop your keys off of a cliff.
That's how fast it falls. Now that is called acceleration, because the keys are getting faster and faster every second due to the force of gravity causing a downward acceleration. In other words, it doesn't slow down at all when it meets the cold, hard steel below. It gets faster and faster every second, the definition of acceleration.
So that's what's going on in stage 2. It's not only falling at free fall speed, it's falling at free fall acceleration.
That's right. That means there were no columns. Not one of these 80 columns on any of the floors gave any resistance.
Yeah.
Or at least a third of that building's collapse.
Yeah, and at the beginning they were there. they were there at the beginning, and at the end the ground was there.
Somehow they must have been instantly removed.
Yeah.
Floor by floor. So how does that happen? Well, we're going to see how that might happen, but it results in the total dismemberment of the steel frame of the building.
That's 7 there, that pile of rubble?
Yep. It's about a 4 or 6 story pile of columns and beams which have been severed one from another, and then the perimeter cladding falls on top of it. Interestingly, now this is how real buildings collapse in natural collapses. In this case, caused by earthquakes. Right. We recognize the building as a building. It's certainly damaged. The columns and beams are not severed one from another. The concrete is not pulverized to a fine powder. Another feature that is unique to Building 7. So what could have caused that? Well, let's see if there's any witnesses that could give us a clue. Here's Daryl, a medical student, in the evening of 9/11 being interviewed on the radio.
We were watching the building actually because it was on fire. The bottom floors of the building were on fire, and we heard this sound that sounded like a clap of thunder. Turned around, we were shocked to see that the building was, it looked like there was a shock wave ripping through the building, and the windows all busted out, and it was horrifying. And then, about a second later, the bottom floor caves out, and the building followed after that, and we saw the building crash down all the way to the ground.
A shock wave ripping through the building, windows busting out, and then the building coming down. How about Daryl? That was Daryl. This is Kevin McPadden, former Air Force medic.
You heard explosions, like boom. It's like a distinct sound. It's not like when in compression, like boom, 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 like floors that were dropping and collapsing. This was boom, and like you felt a rumble in the ground, like almost like you wanted to grab onto something. That, to me, I knew that was an explosion. There was no doubt in my mind.
Very articulate.
Yeah. How about this guy? This is Bill Rosati.
I was standing like 2 blocks away, and all of a sudden I just seen a big flash, and then I seen the building coming down, and I just seen people just running everywhere, chaotic like.
A big flash. Also, okay, let's see what might have caused those explosions. Is there any evidence? We have to ask ourselves, of explosives or ignited thermite.
In a normal controlled demolition, how is that done? C4?
C4 and RDX particularly high energy explosives are packed in or placed in shaped cutter charges and planted on the columns and beams throughout the building and then detonated in a precise order. So they provide a very distinct pop, pop, pop that we've all seen in the old hotels in Las Vegas, for instance, which looks very much like Building 7's collapse. So we're looking for something like that, or maybe something that wouldn't have as much of a pop, pop, like thermite, for instance, an incendiary used by the military to cut through steel like a hot knife through butter. Well, the original FEMA report in May of 2002, Building Performance Assessment Team report did an Appendix C with a metallurgical examination of the steel from both Building 7 and the Twin Towers. What do they cite? Never before observed eutectic reactions, intergranular melting, capable of turning a solid steel girder into Swiss cheese, like we see in the end of this beam from World Trade Center 7, which was nicely analyzed and put in their appendix. A rapid oxidation, sulfidation. This doesn't happen with traditional explosive demolitions, and certainly not by fire, by the way, because this one has, this evidence shows liquid iron. That's molten iron. That's iron exceeding 3 degrees Fahrenheit.
3,000 degrees.
The office fires are probably 500 or 600 degrees that we saw in this building.
Yeah, like a campfire.
A little bit more than that.
I mean, because there's plastic and other fuel sources, petroleum fuel sources.
I don't know how hot the plastic gets, but office fires, which includes those things, rarely get above 1,000 degrees, but still, that's a quarter of the temperatures required for the evidence that we're looking at here. Sulfur formed during this hot corrosion attack on the steel. They ask themselves, where could the sulfur have come from? They don't know. They just throw up their hands.
The devil. It came from the devil. It's brimstone.
Sulfur is added to thermite, which is iron oxide and aluminum powder, to become thermate, much more effective at cutting through steel. So that's a possibility where it could have come from. And we'll find that that indeed is where it did come from. Steel members in the debris pile appear to have been partly evaporated in extraordinarily high temperatures. There's a problem here, though. 4,000 degrees is at least 4 times hotter than these fires could ever have gotten.
Office fires. Yeah, if they were office, we're talking 8 times hotter than an office fire.
At 500 or 600 degrees, which is typical, and probably what these were, yes. So we have no accounting in the official narrative of these temperatures, which is why NIST, when they took over the investigation from FEMA in 2002, took out all this metallurgical examination, and it does not appear in any of their reports following that. But this structural engineer documented the melting and evaporation of steel. He's freaked out. He doesn't know where it comes from. He's assuming it happened down in the pile, but it couldn't even happen down in the pile. We have evidence of molten metals pouring out of the crab claw excavators. We can tell by the color of molten iron, molten steel, what its temperature is. We're exceeding 2,500 degrees here.
When was that done? By the time they got an excavator in, it had to be days later.
Yeah. Oh, well, this molten material was seen for weeks and weeks. The fires weren't put out for 3 months. they couldn't put it out. They described like they were putting a lake of water onto these fires, and they couldn't get them out. Well, thermite has its own oxygen source, which is iron oxide, essentially rust. And that can account, it can burn even underwater. Is there any other evidence, say in the dust, of ignited incendiaries? Well, the U.S. Geological Survey does their study too of the dust, looking at all kinds of things, including finding billions of previously molten, that means over 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, iron. We haven't used iron in our skyscrapers for 100 years. This is elemental iron, not steel. Microspheres. How do they get spherical? About the diameter of a human hair. Well, we'll look at all of these. There's about 6% of these dust samples, some of them are composed of these previously molten iron microspheres. Well, gosh, it's up to 4 tons by extrapolation throughout all the World Trade Center dust spread across lower Manhattan from river to river. The EPA says we don't know what they are or where they came from, but we know what they are, and they're used to distinguish World Trade Center dust from common office building dust. What does that mean? That means it's not even World Trade Center dust unless it has all of these previously molten iron microspheres. Well, how do they appear? Well, let's do an experiment. Experiment is the arbiter of competing hypotheses. And in this experiment with thermite, we have what look like thousands of sparks.
How much thermite was that in that pan?
A little bit.
Yeah, a little bit.
I don't know. It's less than a cubic
centimeter, an aspirin tablet.
Yeah. So they cool, they fall. That's what thermite does. Under pressure, molten iron, just like water, forms itself into spheres. So that's how they got spherical. Could that be what's accounting for the toasting of the tops of these cars in and around the World Trade Center? In this very high heat event, we have the toasting of cars. There's no accounting for this in the official narrative whatsoever.
This is a real Warren Commission report, isn't it?
Yeah, the 9/11 Commission.
The whole thing is a magic bullet theory.
They all had conflicts of interest. That's why they were chosen to pull it together. So if that was all evidence of ignited thermite, and it could only be that, is there any evidence of unignited thermite in the World Trade Center dust? Well, a team of 8 international scientists was looking into it, studying it, and they received 7 independently collected samples, like this one from Jeanette McKinley's apartment across Liberty Street from the South Tower. All their windows blew in due to the incredible explosive force that we'll be looking at from the Twin Towers. And in the dust, they found these red and gray chips. Well, they're red on one side, gray on the other, dual layered, indicating they were applied like paint in a fluid. Well, the problem is that they're attracted by a magnet, so they have a high iron content. They get real curious because these guys know that iron is a key component of thermite. So they study the red layer very carefully. And what do they find? Iron oxide and aluminum powder, the ingredients of thermite. They find these signatures. What is that doing in the paint? This is not normal paint. So we already have a signature of thermite in this first test. So they do another one. They zoom in 50,000 times with a nuclear microscope and find iron oxide rhomboidal shaped crystals and aluminum platelets at the nanoscale, 1,000 times smaller than the diameter of a human hair. So, wow, that's not normal. It's set in a matrix of oxygen, silica, and carbon. These are organic materials. Organic materials are added to TNT, like to expand rapidly and knock things over or blow through things. That's where high energy explosives get their force. So that's very interesting. They also do a third test and find that this material, when put in a differential scanning calorimeter, which is essentially a heater that measures energy output also, they find that at about 800 degrees Fahrenheit, these chips ignite. And what did they find they produced when they ignited? Molten iron microspheres.
It's starting to sound to me like, in addition to controlled demolition, the beams were coated with an accelerant.
Well, let's ask that question after we look at all the evidence, because you might be right.
Okay. And you know, by the way, just saying, one of my hobbies is I listen to the scanner. Normal EMS scanner, police, fire, ambulance corps. And any time there's a fire, an arson investigator is sent. And the first thing they look for is accelerant.
Yeah, thermite is a great way to start fires. You can buy it on eBay.
You
It's
can.
an arsonist's dream come true.
You can buy thermite?
Yeah, it's essentially comes in two components: iron oxide, which is essentially rust, and aluminum powder, none of which are illegal. You combine them 3/4 to 1/4, and you've got thermite.
We'll have to bleep that out.
You can light it with a sparkler stick or a magnesium rod.
Because I know I've got some pyromaniacs in my audience who might
go
out and start collecting rusted aluminum powder just to try this out.
Well, guess what is produced when these chips ignite?
A lot of iron.
Molten iron microspheres with the same chemical signature as the molten iron microspheres found and documented by the U.S. Geological Survey and by R.J. Leah, environmental consulting firm. So we know exactly where those billions of previously molten iron microspheres came from. They came from these red-gray chips. It's extremely clear. This stuff is quite advanced. It's not made in a cave in Afghanistan. It's made only in the most advanced.
Wait, really? That part's not true?
What?
That part is not true? The cave in Afghanistan?
Oh, no. Yeah.
The guy who looks like Jesus with the walking stick. Remember him?
You mean
with the M16 or something?
Yeah. Cute.
Jesus with a machine gun.
All this was documented in the Bentham Open Chemical Physics Journal in a peer-reviewed paper in 2009. We've had this for quite a while, and we've given it to every member of Congress. We've given it to the media. We've provided it to the U.S. Attorney in Manhattan, one of 60 exhibits to be given to a special grand jury investigation.
Who could be in that grand jury? Preet Braha?
Preet Braha?
Preet Braha, the former U.S. attorney from the 2nd district, or a different U.S. attorney?
Who was the U.S. attorney?
That's okay if you don't know.
He is currently the U.S. Attorney General, Merrick Garland.
Ah.
Yeah. So he's been promoted for doing a great job over there in New York.
He was kicked upstairs.
Yeah. And so we are making a film with those 60 exhibits, and we're in the middle of post-edit. We've made the film. We've filmed Mick Harrison of the litigation director for the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry, and myself, and a couple of dozen experts, all laying out this evidence in 24 episodes that are coming out in spring. So we encourage people to co-produce the film, by the way, at richardgage911.org. we do need your help in getting this done. It will be the most comprehensive body of evidence that the 9/11 Truth Movement has produced and up to date. And so we have to ask ourselves, gosh, if the evidence for Building 7 and this extreme temperature evidence with incendiaries, it is so clear, don't we have to at least look at the evidence available at the Twin Towers?
Can we just can we wrap up 7 very briefly? So two things. One is Larry Silverstein makes this famous quote one year on the Rebuilding America PBS video where he says,
let me tell you what he says, because I memorized it.
Oh, please, you do your rendition of it.
I don't want you to get it wrong. And you got the voice right.
Wow.
Well, there's been such terrible loss of life. I was talking to the fire commander. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And so they gave the order to pull, and we watched the building come down.
I once went to war with the
phone.
Wikipedia editors.
Pull the building? What do you mean?
Well, pull, you look up pull in the dictionary, means take the building down. But I was one of the people who went to war with the Wikipedia editors on the World Trade Center 7 building over the definition of the word pull. And the official version, the walkback of what that means is we meant to pull the search and rescue team.
Well, the firefighters.
Yeah, but there weren't any in there. And why would they ask the landlord?
There weren't firefighters in there. So how could he be referring to the firefighters? They weren't allowed to fight the fire. They've been held back, actually, by thugs with paramilitary, seen by not only Richard Patterson, Captain Fire Department, who was prevented from approaching the building with his fire chief, Chief Fox, but also by Patrick Dillon, who was in Building 7 and kicked out by battalion chiefs and who were accompanied by thugs with guns.
Right.
Like Uzis, as he described them.
And then the last thing is, my question is, Silverstein says, so we gave the order to pull, but that assumes you can set a building like this up for controlled demolition in 20 minutes. Now, I'm assuming it takes longer than 20 minutes. How long do you think it would take to set up World Trade Center 7 for controlled demolition?
Oh, it would take months.
Months.
Yeah. Right. And you have to move the occupants around in the building, which we understand that they were moved quite a bit. It's a huge job.
Yep. Well, it takes a whole day to do a chimney. I looked into this on my, persistent turning over of stones, and in one day you can prep a chimney for controlled demolition. Like garden variety brick chimney. Takes all day.
Yeah, it would definitely take months. And we have witnesses inside Building 7, 2 of them, Barry Jennings and Michael Hess, who were blown around in the building between floors 6 and 8 in particular by explosions, which also blew a hole in the wall, which also blew an elevator cab 30 feet outside of the elevator shaft in that building.
How did they escape with their lives to tell the story?
Well, they had to be rescued because they couldn't get down so one of the things that you do in controlled demolition is you blow up the stairwells because beforehand, so the building can come straight down when you set the charges on the columns.
Oh, you first take out the stairwells to remove extra strong structures that might slow the thing down.
Yeah, or cause it to tip. You don't want to do that in downtown.
Because I can imagine stairwells have an extra level of integrity because they're like a crisscross design and
well, they would provide some resistance, which you don't want. Yeah. And that
have you ever been involved in a controlled demolition project, or did you just this one? Did you adopt this orphan?
We put the buildings up and then they take them down in one
Right.
way or another. We don't put them up so that they can be taken down.
Right.
A
No.
myth that's been floating around out
Yeah,
there.
one of my favorite lines from the documentary Explosive Evidence is one of the architects says, "There's a reason you feel safe standing on top of one of our buildings."
Yes, that's.
And I always think about
rolling
that.
down.
And I always tell people that, there's a reason you feel safe standing here. I've completely stolen this line from your movie. And that's because architects design them and engineers design them to feel safe.
Yeah.
To not be flipping around in the wind a little bit, though the buildings like that do have some flexibility. Now we're going to go to towers 1 and 2, right?
We've got to do that because Building 7 happened on its collapse on 9/11.
Yes.
So it was part of the
Festivities?
conspiracy. No matter how you frame it, it was a conspiracy.
Yes.
It's just a different conspiracy than we had
We're
been
told,
led to believe. I mean,
Yes.
just look at the collapse shown here simultaneously of the North Tower on the right and the South Tower on the left. Is there any similarity? Well, they look exactly the same because they are the same. We have upward, outward, arching streamers, a geometry of
outward.
fireworks.
Yeah.
What?
Yep. Upward, outward.
Freely flying structural steel sections weighing 4 and 8 tons ejected laterally up to 600 feet. We'll come back to that. But just looking at it, we have asymmetrical damage from the airplanes and the fires in each of these buildings, and
Yep.
yet they don't fall. They're blown up the same way. Let's look into it. Do we have any of the features of controlled demolition? Well, let's start with sudden onset. Feature number 1. The building is standing still, the North Tower, and all of a sudden it's in uniform downward motion, which is accelerating once again.
It almost looks like around the level of the alleged airplane crash, that they took that out and let the top crush the rest of the building.
Well, let's look into it because we examine that exact concept in a moment. But let's go to the South Tower first.
Because you don't need enough explosions to take the whole building out. The building has potential energy in it by the mere fact that it's standing there.
That's what they tell us. And that they tell us, in fact, that the top section drove the rest of the building down to the ground with that kinetic potential energy.
Yeah, right. But obviously you'd need to remove resistance well below it for that to work. I know I'm ahead of the game here, but I've been through this like 40 times. And,
yeah, but your audience hasn't. So
no, some of them, most of them at
them.
least once. But look, and we're going to push this to many new people.
Yep. We're going to
and we're not in flat Earth territory here. I mean, everything you're saying is completely documented by physics. And I'm one of these people who believes that all science comes back to physics.
And here's a physicist that tried to convince us that it's an orange when it's really an apple.
Mm.
Their effort is to tell us that with the crush down, crush up theory of Zdenek Bazant,
pancake theory
from Northwestern University in Chicago, that the top part crushes the bottom part and then destroys itself. Well, this completely violates Newton's third law of motion. We'll get into that, but he put out a paper, a very complex paper, 2 days after 9/11.
2 days.
2 days. It took engineers 10 years to decode it. And they did. And you'll be shocked what they find. We'll look at that later. But the theory is it violates Newton's third law, which says that there's an equal and opposite destructive force when two bodies collide. It's like running a Volkswagen into a Mack truck. Who wins? The Mack truck wins, not the Volkswagen. It doesn't matter if you drop the Volkswagen onto the Mack truck. The lightest, weakest part of a structure cannot possibly destroy the heavier intact cold hard steel, which below, which is getting heavier and heavier and heavier as you go down, because the top part is light. Then you go down 10 stories, it gets heavier.
Ah, yes, that's a brilliant part of the design of the Trade Center.
Well, yeah.
Was it the
and every
bottom?
other skyscraper,
The bottom holds up the top.
The whole thing has got to be the strongest, right? Until you get halfway down, it's 2 inches thick and 36 inches wide and 16 inches by 16 inches.
You mean the coating around the
Heavier and
outside
heavier.
or the
What?
core?
What?
Ah, the core beams too get thicker as it goes down to hold
They're
up more
all
like pyramid. It's
solid
like
steel, 52 inches by 22 inches at the
it's
bottom.
kind of a pyramid in a way, right?
It's a virtual pyramid, structurally speaking. Yes. And that's why the lightest part is not going to destroy this
Right.
heavy. There's 47 of these particular columns, 52 inches by 22 inches in the core, and 247 around the perimeter that are 14 inches square. Not going to happen. Plus, guess what? It didn't happen. Watch. The top part, the Volkswagen, is being destroyed. In fact, let's make it easier. Watch. The lower red line does not move down.
Yes.
It's telescoping in on itself.
Yeah.
It's being, the structure, if you will, is being liquefied already. So it's not driving anything down to the ground.
Yeah. Where's all that mass going?
The mass doesn't change. It's just not a rigid body. So it's incapable of driving the rest of the building down to
Yeah,
the
but
ground.
I'm wondering where the mass goes. Is it just turning into that gaseous substance
Well,
there?
Nope. Let's look, because the mass is going laterally, freely flying solid molten objects ejected laterally, just like the volcanic eruption in the Tongan Sea, trailing thick white smoke clouds. Why are they trailing thick white smoke clouds? We talked about thermite and incendiary used by the military to cut through steel like a hot knife through butter. Here you have the evidence of the aluminum oxide off-gassing, which is one of the byproducts of thermite, the other being liquid molten iron. So steel members are not flammable, especially in office fire conditions, and especially by jet fuel, which is essentially kerosene, which only burns at 600 degrees Fahrenheit, according to its manufacturer, ME Petroleum.
In an ideal condition.
Well, yes.
If you put it through a turbine.
Well, that gets really much hotter in that case.
Oh, I see.
And that's what you have going on inside the plane engine. But after that crash, we're talking about open air fuel, which can only burn 600 degrees Fahrenheit, according to the manufacturer. And if it were there, this upper part driving the rest of the building down to the ground, you would see it. But none of the
it disappears first.
Yep.
Okay.
We saw it disappearing in the first 3 seconds. Yeah. Something else happens very differently after that first 3
And by
seconds.
that's our friend Building 7 right in the foreground posing there.
Yep. And it gets hit by a few of those columns and beams. But NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, says that is not a significant factor in the building's collapse.
7's collapse.
Yep. They cite the column 79 in the northeast corner, which is toward us in the picture and on the other side of the building from the North Tower.
Yeah.
So their whole theory rests on destruction. Well, a series of events caused by thermal expansion, pushing a long span beam, warming up long span beams, which they couldn't have because they were fire protected with cement-like coating, pushing a girder off of its seat then on this particular column 79, and then causing a pancake and collapse of at least 9 floors, at which point column 79 buckles and then causes a vertical collapse. We didn't go into that today because we're on a time leash. But if that upper section were there crushing the rest of the building, it would have crushed these few remaining core columns standing 1,000 feet in the air, which after about 6 seconds, again,
just drop.
Seemed to suffer an explosion, which shakes some of the concrete powder off of them. And then you can see the top dropping frame by frame through that concrete powder. This is not steel turning to dust, as is attempted to convince people.
I mean, the Judy Wood theory that it's turning to dust, it's evaporating in midair.
Yeah, and there's no steel dust in the dust. If the steel was turning to dust, the many different companies and agencies who studied the dust would find steel dust in the dust.
As opposed to iron.
Iron, yeah, exactly. Elemental iron is what is found. So that's just one of the many refutations that can be made for that theory.
Yeah, but I mean, were you in those buildings when they were standing?
No.
They were amazing. I went in a couple of times and ate lunch on top of Tower 1 and Windows on the World. My mom took me out to lunch, and then my dad's girlfriend took me into a supply closet where we could listen to the building sway way at the top. Wow, they're amazing. I mean, they were just incredible structures that I've read were designed to withstand multiple simultaneous jet strikes.
2 of them at least. And
if you design it for one, you've got to design it for 2.
Yeah, his boss, Leslie Robertson's boss, John Skilling, says, yes, it could take the impact of 2 Boeing 707s, which are smaller but faster than the 757. So they have the same, or virtually the same kinetic energy. But he said the problem would be that the fuel would dump into the building, but that the building would still be there. Meaning,
was he the designer who was caught in traffic at the Lincoln Tunnel or something, the Holland Tunnel? One of the architects was caught in traffic at the Holland Tunnel on the way in that day. And he saw his building, where he had an office in the building, damaged. And I heard him interviewed. I don't remember his name. And he said, what do you think he said looking at Tower 1 damaged like that?
Oh, no, I'm not familiar with this.
He said, it's going to take a long time to fix.
Not that the building is going to come down.
Fall down in half an hour. It's going to take a long time to fix. I thought,
Well, we have to ask ourselves, okay, if there was explosions, we need to find out if witnesses heard them. Turns out there's not only 118 in the oral histories provided by the first responders within a month after 9/11, but then 156 found by Professor Graham McQueen in the 12,000 pages of transcripts. Then he found 30 more, so 186 altogether. Let's go through every one of them. No, but a few of them. We felt the ground shake. Yep. You could see the tower sway, and then it just came down. So the ground shaked, the tower swayed, and then the building coming down. That's a specific order of events we're going to see again and again through some of these testimonies like this one. All of a sudden, the ground just started shaking. Felt like a train running under my feet. The next thing we know, we look up and the tower is collapsing. It shook my bones. Shortly before the first tower came down, I remember feeling the ground shaking. I heard a terrible noise. And then debris just started flying everywhere. I saw a flash, flash, flash. A lot of them saw flashes like this at the lower level of the building. You know, like when they demolish a building.
Just like that.
With each popping sound, initially an orange and then a red flash. So here he's correlating the popping sounds with the flashes. Came out of the building, and then it would just go all around the building on both sides. Saw a number of brief light sources being emitted from inside the building between floors 10 and 15. He saw about 6 of these brief flashes accompanied by a crackling sound before the tower collapsed. I saw low-level flashes. I saw flash, flash. And then it looked like the building came down. You see the specific order of events. I mean, these expert witnesses these first responders couldn't possibly be any more specific. You ever see professional demolition where they set charges in certain floors and you hear pop, pop, pop? When I heard that friggin' noise, that's when I saw the building coming down. An explosion appeared at the very top simultaneously from all four sides. Material shot out horizontally. And then there seemed to be a momentary delay before you could see the beginning of the collapse. We're told by NIST, who didn't include any of these witnesses, first responders, in their report. Do you think they're relevant? They're highly relevant in the investigation of what caused this building to come down. Not one of them appears in any of their reports. Yet they claim to have interviewed 116 of them. They missed these ones, which were in writing and orally recorded within a month of 9/11. There was an explosion in the South Tower, one floor under another. When it hit about the fifth floor, I figured it was a bomb because it looked like a synchronized, deliberate kind of thing. It seemed like on television when they blow up these buildings, it seemed like it was going all the way around like a belt. All these explosions. The building was blowing out on all four sides. You actually heard the pops. You heard the pops of the building. I thought the terrorists planted explosives somewhere in the building. That's how loud it was, a crackling explosive. Another loud boom at the upper floors, and then there was a series of smaller explosions which appeared to go completely around the building at the upper floors. And another loud earth-shattering blast with a large fireball that blew out more debris. The lower level of the building, like when they demolish a building, that's what I thought I saw. Did you see any flashes? I said, yes. Well, I thought it was just me. He said, no, I saw them too. Everybody, I think at this point, still thought these things were blown up. So I was fully expecting anything else to blow up. You were there when the planes hit? No, I was there when the building exploded. You mean when it fell down? No. When it exploded.
I knew a John Coyle in school. I wonder if that's the same guy in Brooklyn.
Did he become a firefighter?
Might have been. I came from a working class community.
Ah, cool. Look him up. Was there a straight down symmetrical progression of destruction? Well, the South Tower begins to actually tip over, but it stops and settles back into the building below it, but it's 22 degrees off center. It looks like it's falling off. So we have asymmetrical damage from this load on the building below, asymmetrical damage from the fires in the planes up above. How in the world do we get complete symmetrical damage then, traveling all the way down every facade of each tower?
This is an astounding branch of engineering all by itself. The ability to design this is got to take a lifetime to learn how to do this.
And look at this. I agree. Floor by floor, or every third floor or so. It's hard to tell with this building because there's no horizontal striation. But you can see in this looped video at least a dozen explosions, which are clearly just that.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, this isn't a nuclear weapon going off. These are timed explosions. And it's not energy weapons either that do that. So what can do that? Well, whatever it is, it's doing this also. Well down below, 20 stories down, 40 stories down, we have these isolated explosive ejections, even 60 stories down.
What do you think those were? Stairwells?
Well, I don't know.
Or like
tell.
A little bit of a soften up the territory.
Could be, or they're mistimed explosions. And these squibs are occurring all over the place.
Squibs.
In this isolated explosive ejections called squibs in the controlled demolition industry.
Yeah.
They're blowing out of the left side of the South Tower, even as it is beginning to tip to the right. We see a dozen independent, isolated explosive ejections in this looped video. So they are essentially liquefying the structure, if you will, which renders it not a rigid body anymore, such that it can act as such and fall off the building, but destroying its rigidity so it can't do that. How fast is the building coming down? David Chandler does analysis. He's a physics teacher, and concludes that this is 64% of free fall. So the towers were at free fall acceleration. The building 7, excuse me. These towers are at 2/3 of free fall acceleration, meaning they're still getting faster and faster and faster straight down through the path of greatest resistance, which is this, the thousands of tons of structure beneath the point of jet plane impacts, as if it's not even there almost.
Yeah. No, these buildings were like mountains. They were like being able to walk up to the base of a mountain and touch the base of the mountain.
80,000 tons of structural steel beneath the point of jet plane impacts in the North Tower.
80,000 tons of structural steel below the point of impact.
Yeah.
Per building.
And it's going faster and faster and faster, as if it were a bowling ball falling through the ends of tree branches or something. How there should have been these structures, by the way, are 20 times stronger than they needed to be to handle the dead load of the building, which is the weight of it.
Yeah.
And that was because they are designed to take hurricanes, which can happen in New York. And this is quite a flat sail up there that has to be structurally resistive of such forces. So that made the perimeter columns in particular 20 times greater. It's a huge, massive set of columns.
Yep. I watched them go up as a child.
Oh.
Because we would drive past that, frequently. And it was incredible to even see it.
Wow. Well,
when my family bounced a lot between Brooklyn and Manhattan, so therefore they're on the Brooklyn Bridge. Therefore, you go right past that.
It's also incredible what happened to the pieces of that building, because they've been laterally ejected, a feature not like normal controlled demolition, impaling themselves, these exterior structural steel sections.
Where was the World Financial Center? Where was that one?
600 feet away from the towers. That's how far these
that's not a building on its side. That's like a big atrium.
Exactly.
And you're saying that atrium is impaled with these spears.
Yep, destroying it. And if they went that far, and they did, well, you can see them going that far in this step-by-step downward progression of these freely flying structural steel sections.
It's like almost the width of the building on each side.
It's more than that. The building is 200 feet wide, but on each side they were ejected 600 feet. In this case, this one it is destroying. Well, it is impacting building 7, but look how it flies outwardly at first, and then down at a 45 degrees when gravity finally begins to take over. But its initial force is lateral. So that is damning to the official story, because that takes an incredible amount of energy, enough energy to eject a 200-pound cannonball 3 miles.
2,000 pound.
And there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these. What?
That's more than 200 pounds in that cannonball.
Right. The image doesn't match. Let me get a picture of a...
I see. It's just for illustration purposes.
Well, it's an exaggeration that I should fix. I'll get
It's
you a
still
twin
ridiculous to
flame.
see a cannon like that. I mean, what a stupid concept.
I don't know. It depends on what you're trying to accomplish.
I guess it does, doesn't it?
It'll certainly take more building out if you send that one out there. But ask yourself this question. If 100,000 tons of steel framing is distributed outside the footprint,
Whoa.
in this photograph, you got to ask yourself, what's crushing the building? Because that weight was used by Zdeněk Bezant in his calculations to crush the building. It can't crush.
Well, you can crush it, but still, how do you propel things with that big of a perimeter? The footprint of the impact, the footprint of the debris field is astounding.
Well, the
to
pile of
move
steel is
that much mass that far in all directions.
Yes. An amazing amount of force. You can see it in effect here. It's actually a 1,400 foot diameter is what is going on here. The building, again, is only 200
diameter. The entire, not the semi-major axis, the diameter.
Well, these were blown in all directions.
Yeah.
Well outside the perimeter of the World Trade Center itself.
Yeah.
12 to 1,400 feet, depending on the World Financial Center is to the west, across West Street. And that was the Winter Gardens right there in the middle that was destroyed that you were asking about right there. So that's pretty incredible. So maybe it was the concrete that crushed the steel, because there were 110 floors of concrete, an acre in size each.
Yeah.
And 4 to 8 inches thick. So we'll be looking for those floors here on the left, but we have a 4 or 5 story pile of miscellaneous metal. Not enough to crush the building, certainly, but we don't see any of those floors. We don't see 50 of them. We don't see one of them on the left. In a real pancaking collapse, we, like on the right, due to earthquake in Mexico, we see pancakes. So where are the floors? We're missing them. Oh, here are the floors. They are pulverized in midair. In all the photos and all the videos showing just that, 90,000 tons of concrete in each of the buildings, pulverized to 100 micron particles.
It almost seems like they painted the entire interior of the structure with nanothermite paint.
There you go again, jumping to conclusions. They certainly
I'm
did
sorry,
something.
this is getting old. I've been looking at this like 23 years, man.
Yeah.
Come on, tell me something
we'll
I
talk
don't
about
know.
it, but ask yourself this. If that concrete is spread, and it was, river to river in a 3-inch thick or so blanket, how could it crush the building?
Well, right. This is flat Earth territory here.
So it
can't do it. It's not there to crush it with.
It's not there to crush it with. Neither was the steel, right?
Yeah,
well,
no.
Together, that's like 3/4 or more of the weight of the building.
Yeah, the rest is desk chairs, telephones.
Yeah.
Basically.
And all of it was used in Zdeněk Bezant's calculation to crush the building. Not only that, but he doubled the mass up.
Oh, this is the
above.
2-day paper. This is the quick peer-reviewed rush job.
2-day paper by Zdeněk Bezant. He doubled the mass up above, and he decreased the column strength below by a factor of 3. That's what engineers were able to decode. And they submitted
you mean when they looked at his math and they compared it to the actual specs?
Yeah,
he was cheating.
Years.
He was cheating.
Oh, completely cheating. Not only was there no steel and no concrete, hardly, that could crush the building, but this guy doubled it up above. He rigged it in favor of a collapse, and he got it in his math. So we have to ask ourselves, surely they saved the evidence, and easily the most largest and most perplexing
Surely
structural
they saved it. Yes.
failures in history. But no, 400 truckloads a day were lined up, ready to take this steel
To China.
starting just 2 weeks after 9/11. Put on barges and, yes, sent to China for recycling before forensic investigators could get their hands on it and do a real investigation.
And what goes to
Promptly
fresh
killed
kills? What's being taken to other building debris, not the steel? Other debris is going to fresh kills?
Yeah, I think most of it went to Fresh Kills landfill.
But the metal went to China for recycling.
After it was put in Fresh Kills landfill and put on barges, yeah.
Ah, so it does go to fresh kills, then they
Yeah.
ship it off to China because they've got to sift for body parts. That's where the forensic operation is going on, is at fresh
Yeah.
kills.
That's correct.
Poor Staten Island.
Well, they tried to get the body parts at the site itself.
No, I mean like the nickel ones, but anyway.
Well, what was left, unfortunately, most of the people, or 1,100 of the people of the 3,000 were not even found, not a trace.
Well, I can see that. I mean, I've heard that the largest object found was like a touch tone pad that you couldn't even find an intact telephone or an intact chair.
And there were
Fragments.
6,000 pieces of bodies that were small enough to fit into a test tube. That's the degree. And by the way, those
They were using test tubes probably to capture the body parts.
perhaps, but they were ejected up to 800 feet from the towers.
Yep.
So how does
The
gravity?
Deutsche Bank building, how
blocks-
far away was that? That was when they were still finding body parts on top of years later.
Oh yeah, bone fragments.
Bone fragments, yeah.
A half an inch long, found on top of nearby skyscrapers. It's incredible. This is in my extended. If anybody wants to go into more detail on this, I recommend our webinar.
But see, the scale of this,
them.
like there's something, see the psychological, spiritual aspect, that's why it's so important, is because this is incontrovertible if the only question is, was this done by a jet airliner? Right? If that's all we're here to decide, which is really all we're here to decide, could being struck by a single 737 do all of this? No, it's done.
Well, and then you have fire, and then you have the building being destroyed or collapsing.
Yeah,
as
but
they
the
say.
precipitation, the thing at the beginning that knocks all the dominoes down, said to be one little plane crash, which I heard one description of saying that would be like poking a pencil through the screen of your screen door and then the whole house falls down structurally.
Something like that.
You would not expect that to happen.
Yes. Well, this destruction of evidence, illegal destruction of evidence in a crime scene, caused Bill Manning, editor-in-chief of Fire Engineering magazine, to cry out, "Crucial evidence that could answer many questions is on the slow boat to China, showing an astounding ignorance of government officials to the value of a thorough scientific investigation. The destruction and removal of evidence must stop immediately." Of course, it didn't. So all of this evidence has convinced so many experts, 3,600 of them signed on to the petition demanding a new investigation. You can see their names at richardgage911.org. To sign that petition, it's an extraordinary amount of evidence comprising proof of controlled demolition. And as we've been talking about, this documentary on the left, 9/11 Explosive Evidence Experts Speak Out, has not only the evidence, but the several psychologists who try to tell us why this is so difficult to come to grips with, because it makes us confront our own worldview, because we have to then say and agree, yes, this was set up in our society, America. We have a group of renegade politicians and industry personnel, military, and the media who covered it all up, conspiring to pull this on the American people. That's a lot of people involved. And it shows you how deep and wide this conspiracy is, because they pulled the wool over the eyes of most of the world and its governments.
Yep.
And so we got to wake up, because it may be happening again. In fact, it is. In the last 3 years, you may have looked around and seen what's been going on with regard to COVID and the false solution to the false problem, that both of which they created, which is extremely dangerous to not only people, but our society, of course, if they have that much power. So wake up, people. It's time to know the truth about 9/11. Because where do you draw your line in the sand? You going to wait for the next 9/11? We've already had a couple of them since 9/11.
Yep.
No, we got to speak the truth about 9/11. Because look, we're as powerful, let's say, as a 3 millimeter high domino compared to the deep state, right? But if we exercise our...
I was hoping that'd be video.
Power.
Boom.
What limited power we assume that we
That was
have.
13 dominoes. If I had 29 dominoes, the last tall as the Empire State Building.
Because each one's a
if you
1.5 times the
proportion.
previous.
Right.
So we can take down the deep state if we work together. And for instance, if each person watching this video tells 2 more people and sends this podcast link of Planet Waves to your friends, family, and asking them to send it to at least 2 people, guess what? We could knock over the Empire State Building of the deep state tomorrow. That's how powerful we are.
But consciousness is the issue. The human mind is the obstacle, I think.
I remember getting it.
Sorry. The human mind is clearly the obstacle. It was my obstacle for 6 years in a huge way. It kept me from being open or available to the evidence that was all around me. But until 2006, I wouldn't consider it.
Interesting. Interesting. Well, yeah, see, I've done a lot of fraud investigations starting from when I was 19 years old. So I was kind of, that's when Neil Young wrote the song Sugar Mountain when he turned 19. So I kind of had that young rock star thing with journalism, which is not very, you're not a rock star. You're not, there's not as much money. It's not as much fun. You don't get to steal a car with Jimi Hendrix and drive it around. It's kind of thankless in a way, but I couldn't do anything else. I mean, so by the time I got to 9/11, I was experienced at the sorting out process. If that is true, then that can't be true. If those 3 things are true, then that thing can't be true. And not the abuse of inductive logic. It's very easy to abuse inductive logic and say, oh, you can see that mountain from that mountain, therefore the world is flat. Well, maybe we should look a little more carefully. This is, I'm used to things taking many years to figure out, and I have to have that patience. So by the time when I finally got those pictures from asil.org, and I didn't care so much about their diagram with the airplane stuck into the Pentagon, I went right for the DOD photo by Sergeant somebody. I wish I could remember his name. I want to write him a letter and thank him on day 3. And I was not that good in Photoshop, but I sliced that photo up into different parts and said, all right, let's deal with that part. Nothing going on. Let's deal with that part. And I used cold logic. There has to be part of your mind, if you believe in science or you think it might be a good thing, you just have to go to cold logic for an hour. Not that long. I know it hurts, but for 1 hour, you use cold logic, and there's absolutely nothing else you can conclude. So then we come to the spiritual barrier. Right. So we're going to do this next week, but let's just stay here for a second. I mean, there are people. Look, I have really not gotten complaints. I've been giving. Look, this is the executive version of my 9/11 rant. I've got you on the I've got you on the screen, but no one's complained. No, I'm an astrology website doing this. No one has complained and accused me of being a conspiracy theorist. The one time that I got people angry at me, you'll like this. When Dick Cheney had his heart transplant, it was right before April Fool's Day. So April Fool's Day is when I get my revenge on everyone. And I was sitting in a diner waiting for my girlfriend for her bus tour. It took me 20 minutes to write this article. I wrote an article about how Dick Cheney got the heart of a 9/11 truther. And soon after his operation, he held a press conference in the hospital lobby, Walter Reed or wherever, and said, "We did it. We did it. It was us. I can't lie anymore." And that went viral, and people were very angry that that was a joke.
Oh, you told it like it was real.
Yeah, I wrote a straight story. Dick Cheney has change of heart, admits to 9/11 was the headline. Wow. Dick Cheney has change of heart. You think a lot of people will be like, come on, buddy. He just had a heart transplant. Dick Cheney has change of heart, admits to 9/11. So
love it.
People were very angry. My friend Betty, who was quite old, didn't talk to me for a month. And I thought, Betty Dodson, like, I hope she doesn't die angry at me. She was so mad. It was the only time I took my phone number off the internet. People were so pissed off at me that it was not true. So I think, what do you do with this? So, I mean, for me, when COVID starts, I woke up one morning knowing I had to keep a chronology, and I knew how fast stuff goes down the memory hole. So the little band of merry rogue astrologers, I organized a team, and we kept a chronology right from March 3rd. And I'm thinking, I'm getting a late start here. And we went all the way back to 06. And I'm the author of the only chronology. When you put things together, real chronology that went all the way out to the end of 21, when you put things together in chronological order, you see what's going on. The chronology is 325 pages, annotated with all the links. So by the time COVID happened, this is 19 years after 9/11. I've been on 9/11 for 18 of those 19 years. You've got to be meticulous from day dot. You've got to start and you've got to save everything. And I knew to do that. This is an incredible presentation. But we get to this spiritual part. We get to this part where, so what of all those people who were pissed off that Dick Cheney really didn't admit it? Well, how do we collect that? How do we turn that into a movement of some kind? Look, that you've pulled together 3,500 architects and engineers is astounding. I can barely even believe that you really did that. It's so astounding that I think, wait a minute, did I dream that? But no. Watch this, go, please click on this. Send me the direct link. You who are watching, watch this documentary. It is astounding. There's a reason you feel safe in our buildings. But this so defies any notion of what's comprehensible. So defies it of what's possible. Yet look, there it is. I remain as astonished as I ever was by this. Completely like a little child. Astounded. So I would say, if you're having trouble with this, let your little kid out. Let your little kid out and wonder why these adults are so stupid. What is it? Your little kid is right there, Richard. You have a childlike happiness about you. This does not seem to make you, want to crawl in the bathtub and take pills. Like, you seem to be getting up every day. And
no, I've been married to people like that.
But you're not at the moment. Gail,
Not
hello, you're
anymore.
off camera, I know, but
I got a rock solid 9/11 truther wife. Gail.
right.
She's amazing.
Yes.
But I know, and it's not. There's places in our lives where we do want to and do crawl under the covers.
Yes.
Psychologically speaking.
Yes.
I can't take on everything that I come across.
Right.
But I've grown substantially in the last 18 years since I've been on mission.
Mm-hmm.
So I encourage people to take this one step at a time. Like you said, start with the cold, hard logic.
Yep. And you
inch your way into what this means.
Yeah, what it means, for example, to have the command center in Building 7. Why do they need to get rid of Building 7? Read the tenant list. Read the tenant list. How many vaults, how much evidence was nanothermited into the 25th dimension?
Well, more close to home, what it means in terms of our personal safety in this world.
Yes. Yes.
If they can murder 3,000 people in New York and more elsewhere, like 2 million in Afghanistan and Iraq, causing an incomprehensible world destruction, what can they do to me? Some people have suffered a fate after learning about this set of conspiracies and trying to expose it.
You have to be very wise how you do it.
Well, I don't know that I've been wise. I've been consistent, persistent. And
to take it, I would say to take it from an engineering standpoint is wisdom. I mean, look, the kids who did Loose Change, they blew a big hole, pardon all the puns associated with that. Kids at SUNY Oneonta, I believe, you've seen this, I'm sure, Loose Change. It does many of the same things you're doing, but it's kind of super amateur, done in a dorm room. But that brought a lot of people in. Loose Change brought a lot of people in.
Yeah, it sure did. We're talking about Loose Change, 9/11, Loose Change 9/11, Dylan Avery and Jason Burmis.
Yeah, students did it. They saw the obvious. So yeah, I've had to come to terms with living in a world that is much more dangerous than the world I would like to live in. A world of Monsantos and GEs and Dow Chemical doing very, very bad things to people. But by the time 9/11 happened, I had already had to deal with the fact of major chemical companies just basically poisoning the entire planet.
Yeah.
And I dealt with my father, who didn't want to accept my findings on the story, though they have been published around the world. They passed the legal review, and GE didn't sue me, and Monsanto didn't sue me, and so there's a reckoning with your parents that happens with this. I mean, my father screamed at me when I went through the evidence. He was a nuclear power public relations guy, communications trainer. So we had. The apple really didn't fall far from the tree on one level, because I learned to be like I am from his example, but he just has a different orientation. But I had to cross that barrier of hearing my father scream at me, there must be something wrong with your evidence. I'm like, well, it came straight from the files of Monsanto. It only has like 5 different exhibit tags and Bates numbers on it. It's not like I downloaded it from Twitter. It's been authenticated in numerous lawsuits. So we really come to the spiritual piece of what a dark place this world can be. That's the barrier, I think. That's the barrier.
It's a lot darker than we ever imagined, and we only know this much of it.
Yeah.
I mean, look what's going on in Gaza. We have a genocide going on that our government is fueling.
Yeah.
Our elected government.
Supposedly elected, yeah.
Well, that's another.
We don't really have elections. It's a complete joke.
And so we can get into
so
all
ridiculous.
of that next week. But I'm just so glad that we had the conversation today, Eric. This is I'm looking forward to next week.
Good. All right,
I'll be
Richard. Thank you.
And we'll be in our living room.
You mean we won't need a PowerPoint?
Yeah, no PowerPoint.
We can just build on this.
Nothing to hide behind. We'll
Yep.
just have a conversation.
And I played that audio many times. I captured that audio of the last 15, 20 minutes, and I stick it anywhere that I can, basically and I work very closely with the leading no virus group. I was the journalist in the no virus group, Bailey's, Cowan, Kaufman, Mike Stone, this group, these top people who did the best work on COVID. And I was the journalist chronicling, and the astrologer daykeeping, right? This is an important job of astrologers. We used to have a role in society, daykeeping, daily logging 10 news articles a day, and then transferring that. And I have, in answer to their, a lot of hand wringing going on, why aren't people accepting this obvious evidence? I'm like, look, listen to what AE 9/11 Truths psychologists have to say about this. We must grapple with the spiritual piece here, with the growth piece.
Yes.
This is me speaking to people for whom I am a kind of a growth exemplar as an astrologer, right? That's what I do. I'm not predicting elections and things like that. I'm talking about self-awareness and how to make decisions and how to deal with this incredible darkness of the world that we're confronted by. I really appreciate your good nature, your loving, friendly spirit in doing this, Richard. I feel like I've known you for a long time.
I know. Yeah, you're a good guy.
All right, sir. So I think we're probably done for today. Thank you to you who have watched this. I know it wasn't that bad. It wasn't that bad. Anything to say in closing?
I hope people will do something with this information and not just sit on it. Maybe sit on it for a day, but.
Well, you've got to think it through. If this is your first time, I realize there's a lot to be confronted by. I'll tell you this, at the end of that week, analyzing that one photo, was a Friday afternoon where I came to the conclusion, everything we were told could not have happened that way. I felt more liberated than I have ever felt before or since. It was as if the entire weight of the world had been lifted off of me, and the feeling lasted for about an hour or two. Very transient, but I had that experience of complete freedom in the universe.
Wow.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, my friend.
All right, Richard, I'll catch you next time.